The title of the series is Transformed Thinking, and so as we have talked before, and I will say that for everybody's benefit, I can get wound up and I can really talk, and when I'm talking, I'm not necessarily looking at anybody who wants to talk instead of me. But I really do want you to, and there's been some good discussion each of the classes previously, and some good questions have been asked, and I certainly don't want to do anything to discourage that, because sometimes the questions or the comments that are made from you are going to help me maybe direct my comments a little more in a more focused way, so I can respond to some things that are really on your mind. So, if we can recap just briefly, we're talking about brain science and scanning technologies and neural networks and brain plasticity. The upshot of all that is God made us in certain very, very specific ways. Scientifically, we are catching up with where God has had us all along. As long as humankind has been on the earth, we've functioned this way. Just in the last 20 to 30 years have some of the scanning technologies been in place that have enabled us to see what's really going on inside the brain. And this is kind of our theme each week, is that we cannot control the thoughts that come into our minds, but we absolutely can control the thoughts that stay on our minds. And so we've used examples of that. There will be more examples of that tonight, that God has created us with the ability to control our thoughts, to control what we dwell on. And yet, I think a vast majority of the general population are probably not aware of that. We think that whatever pops into our mind is there, and we can dwell on things that are very, very self-defeating and counterproductive. And so we're talking about the mind of Christ. As we mentioned last week, we have the mind of Christ. It is there. It's a part of how we are made. However, it needs to be cultivated. We have to, as you would cultivate a garden, we have to cultivate and nurture the mind of Christ in order for it to be prominent in our daily lives. So, self-defeating thoughts frequently come into our minds. We're going to talk a little bit about this in a minute, but almost always, maybe I can say always, these are learned phenomena. And so when a person sits in my office and says something like, I'm a failure, or I'm really unattractive, or I'm not very smart, and that's what they honestly believe about themselves, a question that I really, really like to ask is, where did you learn that? I saw a lady this week for the very first time, and she talked about how she was not very successful, and she probably never would be. Where did you learn that? And it was a very new question to her. The look on her face indicated that she had never really thought about that before. But when you think about it, it's pretty self-evident. Little babies are not born criticizing themselves. They're not born telling you how ugly they are. They're not born trying to please everybody in their lives. And so all of these things are learned, and when we figure out where they've been learned and where the origins are, they're going to be a lot easier to deal with and to offset. So I found a cartoon that I thought you might appreciate. This is a pearls before swine, and so the pig says, or no, is that the pig? Or the goat? That's the goat, I'm sorry. Do you forgive and forget the bad things people do to you? Yes, I forgive people all the time, but I never forget diddly. Never mind, he says, remembering is the first step to exacting vengeance. Right? If you let things slip out of your mind, you're never going to get even with anybody. And we talked a little bit about that last week, that you hear people say, I'll never forget what he did, what she said. I'll never forget. And they're telling you the truth. They're not going to forget because they're not going to allow themselves to forget. As we talked last week, those thoughts, the self-defeating thoughts, can be replaced. And that's one of our challenges as Christians, when we cultivate the mind of Christ. How do we replace the thoughts? And as Paul says in Philippians 4, whatever things are noble, whatever things are right, whatever things are lovely and admirable and excellent and praiseworthy, think on these things. These are the things to replace the self-defeating thoughts with. Dwell on these things. I love the cartoon. There's an ancient Cherokee proverb that says there's a battle of two wolves inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, jealousy, greed, resentment, lies, inferiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, humility, kindness, empathy, and truth. The wolf that wins, the one you feed. The one you feed. It's not complicated. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy to implement and to sustain. But the principle is not complicated at all. It's a very, very simple principle. But it doesn't come naturally. So tonight, we're talking about managing anxiety. When we talk about the mind, we're also talking about the heart. Okay? And in biblical terminology, these two terms are frequently, if not most of the time, are used interchangeably. So, if I want joy, I've got the joy. Where? Where? Okay, and that's exactly where it is. And if we are joyous, then that is going to be a prevailing thought. That is going to be something that we're going to continue to do. It's all about managing our thoughts. So, first of all, some thoughts about anxiety. I mentioned this briefly last week, but anxiety is a natural part of how we are made by God. Some of you know the biology and physiology better than I, but it's a part of the autonomic nervous system. We're all pretty much familiar with the fight or flight response. There's another one that frequently is added to that. We fight or we flee or we freeze. But we do all of those things in response to a perceived danger. And so you can understand how that this fight or flight or freeze response is intended for our survival. What would be our state in life if we did not have the capacity to be startled, to be defensive, to be anxious, and to be afraid? If we didn't have the capacity for those reactions, we might not be alive. You've heard of people who have a condition. I wish I could remember what the name of the condition is. A medical condition where they have lost their sense of feeling, all over their body, but in their hands or in their extremities. And so this person who cannot feel pain, has no ability, no capacity to feel pain, can literally put his hand on a stove that is burning and not feel it. How dangerous is that? You think, well, it'd be nice not to feel pain, but no, it wouldn't be so nice. It would be very, very dangerous, hazardous to our health, and so most of us have that capacity. Well, think about that in terms of anxiety. It's a natural part of how God made us. We wouldn't survive very long without it. But there is healthy anxiety and there is unhealthy anxiety. Most things are on a continuum, maybe a 1 to 10 continuum, and there's usually a healthy side of that and an unhealthy side of that. So in healthy anxiety, what that does is it prepares our bodies to be prepared for some kind of threat, either real or perceived threat. So there are certain glands in the body that release powerful hormones, adrenaline. You've heard pictures, you may have seen pictures of somebody who just musters up some superhuman strength, lifts a car off of someone that a car has rolled on top of, and that's a really dramatic example of that response. Another thing that happens is that blood flows to our bigger muscle groups. So blood will flow away from our feet, away from our extremities, and flow to our chest and our shoulders and our larger muscles in our legs because it's getting ready to do something. So when we're anxious or when we're afraid, we feel a tingling or clammy, cold hands. We talk about having cold feet. Well, there's a biological basis for that. The body is gearing up to do something. Blood sugar is increased in the system to add extra energy. Our breathing rate increases, heart rate increases, blood pressure increases, and all of this is designed to prepare us for some kind of physical action, either fighting or fleeing. The body is in a general state of readiness. And I want you to picture a tiger, a tiger walking through the jungle. And the jungle can be a dangerous place, even for a tiger. So the tiger is walking very stealthily through the jungle. Ears are perked up, muscles are tensed, head is on a swivel back and forth, all in a general state of readiness. Doesn't know what he's ready for, but he's ready for whatever might threaten him. And so that's the way our bodies react as well. Now, it requires a great amount of energy. It puts a great amount of strain on our body systems. Here's the key, and I'm not going to dwell on this because there are other more important things I want to get to. The key is that in primitive societies, you literally worked it out of your system. You've got all of these things happening in your body. So when you either fight that threat or you run away, you are working all of those hormones and all of that blood pressure and all of that stuff out of your system. Today, not so much. So we're sitting at our desk and we have an encounter with the boss. Or we're called into his or her office and we have an encounter that is just as threatening, maybe as the saber-toothed tiger used to be. But it's usually not a good idea to jump across the desk and have a wrestling match with the boss. Even though that might be physically healthier for us to do, usually not a good idea. So what do? We stew in silence. Let's see. Yeah, we grit our teeth, we clench our fists, and we do a slow burn. And so all that stuff is still in our bodies. It's not appropriate or even possible to fight or flee. And so and these responses can happen several times a day. And we're left with all that stuff. Picture a pressure cooker on the stove. The fire is on under the pressure cooker. The steam is building up within the pressure cooker. It's got to have an outlet. Some steam has got to be let off the cooker. And that's one of the reasons why regular activity, some kind of physical exercise, is essential for our healthy living, so we can let off that steam, because tomorrow the steam may build up again. And what we want to do in extreme cases, we want to learn to turn the fire down underneath the pressure cooker. But until we do that, we've got to let off that steam. So healthy anxiety can enable us to be prepared for whatever might happen. Healthy anxiety also can enable us to perform at higher levels than we might do otherwise. This is kind of an interesting diagram. I think it's called the Yerkes-Dodson principle, but after the two people who developed it. But the theory is this: the horizontal line represents the amount of stress or anxiety in our lives. So from 0 to maximum levels of stress. The vertical line represents our performance on the job or performance doing some task. So theoretically, if there's no stress or no anxiety, we're not going to do very much. If you didn't have to pay bills, you might not work at all. Now, some people would, so not everybody would fall into that category. But the theory is that as our anxiety increases in moderate amounts, then our performance increases as well. So that with 0 there, that would be the optimal level of anxiety that would produce the optimal level of performance. Whatever kind of, athletic performance, academic performance, job performance might be appropriate. But as stress continues to increase, then there is a point of diminishing returns. Our performance, the stress can be so overwhelming that our performance lessens until it goes back down to nothing, and we might even experience burnout, and we'll talk a little bit more about burnout later on. So the point is that some anxiety is necessary in our lives, but as I said, there's healthy anxiety and there's unhealthy anxiety. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath here, and I'm going to ask you to join in. I know I haven't given you an opportunity yet. Yes.
So what would you recommend for when you get to that point where you are anxious and you feel like you can't control it?
Yeah.
What are some things that you might do to curb that?
Okay, to curb the physical reactions that you're talking about. Well, what I tell people in my office is that the number one thing you can do, and this is true for anxiety as well as depression, is get outside, put on some good shoes, and go for a walk. Get some physical some activity, some cardiovascular. Okay, we talked a little bit about memory the first night. I think that was the first night. But that's the first thing that you can do that will help. If you're anxious, it'll help bring you down. If you're depressed, mildly depressed, it'll help bring you up. And so that's the first thing. The top 3 things that you and I can do right here, right now, is to do whatever is possible to get a good night's rest, to eat a healthy diet, and to engage in regular physical activity. There are more things, and if I can defer the rest of my answer to the end of, or the later on in this class. But thanks for asking that. Yes.
I am so glad you said that because I have an abortion recovery ministry, and high anxiety, high emotions, what you talked about as far as thoughts and so forth, all of that.
All that and more, and guilt and shame and
everything.
everything to the max,
Yeah.
I think.
And so frequently I'll have them do some hands-on, what we call rituals, workshop elements.
Yeah.
That kind of brings down the stress and makes it more visual. But I'm so glad because I don't think I've ever told them to get rest, to get some exercise.
Yeah.
I think that is very valuable.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for saying that. But that's stuff that is within our control for the most part. I've had sleepless nights before, and I've had trouble going to sleep. And I know it's not as simple as just saying, okay, well, just let yourself go to sleep, because that's not always the way it works. But the more that we can do to increasingly get a better night's sleep. Okay, I'm going to try not to go off on a tangent, but this is the whole idea of sleep research has changed pretty dramatically in just the last few years. When I was earlier on in my practice, I was reading a lot about sleep studies and sleep medicine. And it used to be thought that everybody was an individual and that some people can operate on 3 hours of sleep a night and do very, very well, and some people need 8 or 9 hours of sleep a night. The general consensus now is that everybody everybody, it's the way we're built, needs at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep every night. So if I need 7 hours of sleep, and as a practical matter, I'm getting 6 hours of sleep a night, then I'm operating at a deficit. It's going to be a relatively small deficit at first, but that deficit builds up, and it is unavoidable. Sleep deprivation and sleep deficits are going to impact everything about us. They're going to impact the way that we focus or don't focus, impact the way that we interact with other people, just everything. So I'm not going to say more than that, but some people say, well, yeah, I can get by on 5 hours of sleep. Yeah, you can get by. You're not going to crash and burn tomorrow, but it is really essential. It is really essential that everybody gets 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. And so that's another one of those areas where science is catching up with the way that God created us. Yes.
What about a person that's maybe getting that much sleep, but it's broken up in two-hour intervals?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. That's not good sleep. You heard it here first. We're built to go through certain sleep cycles, different stages of sleep. And there is one stage of sleep that is the most restful and recuperative. And if our sleep is broken up, like you just described, into 2-hour increments where we wake up, I've got a friend who says he sleeps like a baby. He wakes up every 2 hours and cries. Okay? And some of us can identify with that. But that kind of sleep is not, you're not able to get the restorative and the recuperative kind of sleep. And so something maybe needs to be done medically or otherwise. There are some other non-medical things that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But I'm glad you said that because it's a very valid concern. We're going to talk just a little bit about some types of anxiety, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly in order to get to the later stages of the lesson. But in the diagnostic and statistical manuals, there really are 4 types of anxiety. And what I mentioned last week, I want to put on the board that when we're talking about anxiety or talking about depression, some rules of thumb that are really important are to try to determine the frequency of these episodes, the intensity, and the duration. So if I am anxious infrequently, lower in intensity, and briefly in duration, that's probably not going to interfere that much with the way I want to live my life. And so when somebody comes into my office, we're talking about anxiety or depression. One of the questions I ask is, how
I'm a forensic artist. Worked for the San Jose Police Department from 1995 to 2011.
I showed up to a place I'd never been, and there was a guy with a drafting board.
We couldn't see them, they couldn't see us.
Tell me about your hair.
I didn't know what he was doing, but then I could tell after several questions that he was drawing me.
Tell me about your chin.
It kind of protrudes a little bit, especially when I smile.
Your jaw.
My mom told me I had a big jaw.
What would be your most prominent feature?
Kind of have a fat, rounder face.
The older I've gotten, the more freckles I've gotten.
I would say I have a pretty big forehead.
Once I get a sketch, I say thank you very much, and then they leave. I don't see them.
All I had been told before the sketch was to get friendly with this other woman, Chloe.
Today I'm going to ask you some questions about a person you met earlier, and I'm going to ask you some general questions about their face.
She was thin, so you could see her cheekbones. And her chin, it was a nice, thin chin.
She had nice eyes. They lit up when she spoke.
Cute nose.
She had blue eyes, very nice blue eyes.
So here we are. This is the sketch that you helped me create, and that's a sketch that somebody described of you.
So yeah, that's...
She looks closed off and fatter, sadder too. The second one looks more open, friendly, and happy.
I should be more grateful of my natural beauty. It impacts the choices and the friends that we make, the jobs we apply for, how we treat our children. It impacts everything. It couldn't be more critical to your happiness.
Do you think you're more beautiful than you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time as women analyzing and trying to fix the things that aren't quite right. And we should spend more time appreciating the things that we do like.